trillion naira 2024 budget, and that's on page 4. Approved 2024 to 2026 medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy papers sets oil benchmark at $73.96 per barrel, and exchange rate at 700 naira to a dollar.
All right, let's check the Nigerian pilot. Federal government proposes 26 trillion naira budget for 2024. Debt servicing to gulp 8.25 or rather 8.25 trillion naira. Recurrent expenditure 10.26 trillion. Fresh $1.5 billion West Bank loan. Okay, that's all you get on that story. It's all on page 8 of the Nigerian pilot. PDP raises, or rather praises, Governor Diri, says first term performance impressive.
And the Daily Times, trouble looms for sacked CAC Registrar General Abubakar. Workers plot petition to EFCC, ICPC over billions allegedly misappropriated. Party mood at headquarters yesterday.
The Nigerian Express. More trouble for Nigeria. Why? As inflation rises to 26.72%. I don't want to be a baby mama. That's a baby star Messier speaking there.
People's Daily, MTF 2023 to 2025. Federal government proposes 26 trillion naira for 2024 budget. OK's $1.5 billion, IMF $80 million, AFP loans. And then bottom page, health insurance now compulsory. No Nigerian must be left uncovered. NHIA DG.
Federal government proposes 26 trillion naira budget for 2024. Targets December 31 for submission to National Assembly. And then anti-Akeredolu protest, police DSS take over Ondo PDP Secretariat.
This NBS, Nigeria's inflation hit an all-time high of 26.72% in September, while IMF is saying 158 million people face food insecurity in Africa. And you also see that story, strike. FEC OK's 30 days implementation of MOU with Labour warns against interference in union matters.
Daily Independent, CBN lifting forex ban on agri items puts investments in sector at risk. Who's speaking? Find out inside the paper at the Daily Independent. Naira redesign. CBN collected 3.2 trillion naira, printed only 402 billion naira. That's credited to Falana on page 6 as FEC approves 2024 budgetary expenditure of 26.01 trillion naira.
Leadership there, Nigeria ban, rising crude oil, crude price raise, cost of cooking gas. You also see there, despite 7 trillion naira investment, poor power supply lingers, and that's on page 4 of course, Daily Times there.
The Daily Asset, federal government proposes 26.01 trillion naira for 2024 appropriation. FEC approves 2024 to 2026 MTF, FSP, and PEX crude oil at $73.96. Exchange rate at $700. Of course, per naira there. Uproar as first female postmaster general resumes duty at night post. Workers shut down head office.
Nigerian News Direct, Tinubu proposes 26 trillion naira for 2024 budget. You also want to look at that story. NPower, federal government indicates readiness to pay 9 months backlog to beneficiaries. Amid flooding, it's another story on the INEC, on the elections of cycle.
Reps under fire over 130 million naira SUV. Nigerians furious. Federal lawmakers are getting expensive vehicles at time of economic hardship. That's the biggest story there on the front page of the Daily Sun. 2024 appropriation, of course, is also making the paper, and then we have other stories. We are heading for devastating flood. I think that's also coming from the authorities there.
Blueprints, federal government projects 26 trillion naira 2024 budget, 8 trillion naira for debt servicing, earmarks 1.3 trillion naira for statutory transfers, 10.26 trillion non-recurrent expenditure. And you see other stories there, bottom page.
Food access drops as inflation hits a 10-year high. Nigerians lament hunger, poverty. Farmers blame corruption, poor policy implementation. All of that you find on page 4 of the Daily Trust. Experts react as federal government proposes 26 trillion naira for 2024 budget.
Nigerian Tribune, resume or resign. Under PDP youths tell Akeredolu, give him 72-hour ultimatum. Vow to sustain protest. Court to hear Akeredolu aye that he was application October 30th. Akpabio instigated my sack. Senator Abu alleges. Page 6.
The New Telegraph. Also leading with the budget appropriation bill as proposed by the government to us. Then you have fuel scarcity, NNPCL stock insufficient. Ipman alleges as power generation costs made up 49% of end-user tariff in 2022, according to NERC.
And now the Guardian, and guiding on this story, you see that graphical representation at 1,000 naira per dollar. 30% inflation, over 90% Nigerians denied healthy diet. And that's on page 6, says 90% plus cannot afford a healthy diet on affordability if the cost exceeds 52%, amongst other stories there, front page.
Data centers weigh price hike as energy costs soar. That's a Business Day bold story there. Inflation rises for 9th straight month on weaker naira. That's how the paper puts that story. Nigerians give up valuables for fresh start abroad. That's another one. I think we really need to interrogate this gentleman as we start, since it's already here. And Nigerians give up valuables for fresh start abroad. I mean, this seems to be the trend in the country today. I've seen families that have sold everything, just to start afresh abroad.
Amazing,
and then I wonder what happens if anything goes wrong and they have to get back here.
We were just chuckling because that was the subject of our discussion while we were walking into the studio.
Indeed. Okay. Let's even start from the leading stories, because we have some, interesting headlines that have been signposted for this morning. And federal government proposing 26.01 trillion naira for 2024 appropriation. I think that's the leading story for majorly all the papers. And you can see that on New Telegraph, of course. That's where you find that story. You can also find it on other stories. But let's look at that. Alhaji Majid, how do you look at this? I mean, on one hand, the parliament is looking at SUVs, millions, and on the other hand, we have 0.01 trillion naira for the 2024 appropriation.
Well, until the details of the proposed appropriation bill for 2024 is out, you look at the 9 items and see the priorities of government. But from the framework out, vis-a-vis, the breakdown into recurrent, non-recurrent, and the benchmark crude oil price, as well as the exchange rate for the physical framework for the coming year, a red flag actually stands out clearly. And that is the exchange rate that the federal government is proposing as its own benchmark for the budget. With dollar already exchanging at over 1,000 naira, and you are proposing 700 naira as your exchange rate. I don't know how realistic that is going to be. And so for me, already the proposed budget might have just run into some troubled waters. And again, the government seems to be relying heavily on borrowing to finance the budget, as was with the case in the last 8 years of the previous administration. And considering the fact that everybody knows that Nigeria right now has overborrowed, we are like living on borrowed time. And our
debt for our children.
Yes, our debt burden is no longer realistic. It's not something we should actually add to. And the president, in his first FEC meeting, we commended him here for that when he said, look, my ministers need to draw water from a dry well because the idea is we're borrowing and we don't want to borrow more. So we need ingenuity to squeeze out water from stone, essentially. But we have seen a backtracking on that. We've seen borrowings. There are even insinuations that ways and means advances from the CBN has continued this administration.
Yes.
IMF is offering us loans. We are borrowing from AFDB, and the party continues. And for as long as you borrow to fund social projects in the name of capital projects, you continue to borrow because those projects can never pay for those borrowed funds. You see, I don't know the rationale behind governments in Nigeria consistently borrowing to fund road construction, construction of bridges and railways. These are essential government services for citizens that should be done with government-owned funds, because this is where you owe your citizens. These roads cannot pay directly for those monies. And for as long as you borrow monies to invest in such projects, you will keep borrowing. So that has been the case in the last 8 years. So when people argue that there's nothing wrong with borrowing, yeah, there's nothing wrong with borrowing, but what are you borrowing to do? We've consistently argued that government needs to borrow to do real capital projects. And what's a capital project? A business enterprise that can bring you returns on investment of borrowed funds within a specified time frame. So when government borrows money, for example, to fix refineries or build new ones and run it profitably well, that is a capital project. When government borrows money, for example, to build new power plants and run them profitably and commercially, in a commercially viable manner, that is a capital project. When government borrow money to invest in industries and businesses, when you borrow money, for example, to resuscitate the Atakuta steel plant, that is a capital project. When you borrow money to resuscitate ailing textile industries scattered all over northern Nigeria and Lagos, that is a capital project. But when you borrow money to fund road construction, when you borrow money to fund construction of bridges, when you borrow money, for example, to go and share to the so-called indigent citizens,
Palliative.
you are just wasting these monies and you don't have the capacity to pay back. So for how long are you going to continue on this trajectory? At this point, we need a rethink. We need to sit down and take a pause and have a rethink about our political economy and begin to do things like other countries do them. Otherwise, this borrowing will continue, and it appears to me that those that have been appointed into this government do not seem to have anything new to offer.
Because I'm wondering, with the economic team that the president has recently appointed, one would have thought that there would be, in between the lines, dynamic ways of looking at the economy with the reality.
We've not seen that at all. We've not. We've not at all.
All right, Doctor, come in here, because sometimes when we talk about budget proposals, we're fine. But at the end of the day, I think we talk less about how budgets are even implemented in the first place at the end of the day. Before we start talking about 2024, how well has the budget for the 2023 year performed is also very critical, because at the end of the day, no matter how humongous the amount is and the people are not feeling the impact, it becomes a problem. And that's what Majid was trying to talk about there. So can you weigh in on this as well?
Obviously, you are very correct. It's not about budget in Nigeria since 1999. To me, it's just an empty ritual. It's a yearly ritual that has had no specific impact on the Nigerian economy. We come here, we talk about it, right? At least for the last 5-6 years, we talk about when the budget proposal are presented, the MTEF, the proposal in line with the Fiscal Responsibility Act are presented before the budget, before the breakdown. We'll debate it, tear it apart, look at how it will affect the economy, and that's where they end. But we have to blame the media also for not doing its job, a thorough job of following through. I know that there are several NGOs who have made it, part of their mandate to track budget implementation. When the federal government says, okay, we've assigned XYZ amount of money for certain projects, do we as the media, the NGOs, do we follow it through?
To see how much implementation
has happened in the course of the budget year. And apart from that, the government itself, do they have the time? Government seems to be, we do the same thing, like I always say, over and over again, expecting a different result. We are not getting a different result. The focus, unfortunately, when you try to, let not seem as if you are being overly critical of government. You try to want to support government. You ask yourself, what is the new government, the Tinubu administration, what is it doing differently that makes you to want to have hope on the Nigerian economy? There's nothing different. It's just an empty ritual. The budget will have been submitted. It will be debated. What is different? You've proposed a budget of 26 billion. What specific
26
impact?
Trillion.
26 trillion. What specific impact are you trying to achieve? How people-centered is this budget. If you look at the fundamentals of the budget and the fact that you are going to spend almost 8 trillion from the proposal we are seeing there, 8 trillion for debt servicing. It is worrisome. And as you are spending that 8 trillion on debt servicing, you are also budgeting, you are also taking a loan of 1.5 billion and another 800 million from the IMF and from the African Development Bank. Then you begin to ask yourself, when government comes with these idea that look, because one of the reasons that was given for the removal of fuel subsidy is that government will have more money in its coffer to spend.
So that means we'll have more money for the budget now. There won't be much deficit.
Yes, we are supposed to have more money. But from the budget proposal, from the estimate, you find that a lot of questions needs to be asked. Where is the savings, the so-called trillions? From the mouth of Mr. President himself, he said the last time he spoke, when the subsidy regime was just about 2 months, they said they've saved about 2 trillion. So you can assume that in 12 months, at least you'll be able to save about 20 trillion from the removal of fuel subsidy, which has placed Nigeria into untold.
That means that alone, if it runs for close to a year or thereabout, would fund the entire budget.
Which you fund the entire budget. That is even discounting other sources of revenue to the federal government. But for you to now say you are still, hamstrung to the effect to the point of still seeking loans to fund the budget.
$1.5 billion
from
IMF.
To fund the budget, and you are still going to run at a deficit is troubling. It raises a lot of questions about what, the removal. Because at the end of the day, we cannot escape the fact that, look, Nigeria is in crisis as a result of the removal of fuel subsidy. People may want to just paper it up and make it seem as if, we did the right thing. Because the gaslighting over this fuel subsidy removal is too much. Each time the government is speaking at the international forum, like I was listening to the Minister of Budget Planning yesterday, he was trying to make it seem that, look, investors are coming, the fundamentals of the economy is looking so good now because of removal of fuel subsidy.
It's looking so good with 26.7% inflation.
Yeah, floating of the naira, that now the economy is stable. At times when I look at all this, I look at how it affects me, how it affects my neighbor, my family, my friends, and I can tell you that the economy of Nigeria is going nowhere but going down. Investors will not come as long as there is volatility in the exchange rate, as long as there is price instability, as long as producers cannot produce because they cannot sell, as long as we saw inflation figure today, the highest in 18 years, 26.7%. And when we talk about inflation, we have to know that there are two types of inflation. There's always what we call demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. And when your country is experiencing what we call cost push inflation, what does it tell you? It means that the fundamentals in the economy is wrong. If cost push inflation is precipitated by increase in energy, that is just it. Cost of production have gone very high, such that cost of even moving the produced goods from one point to the other is so high that a bag of rice costs, last time I asked, they say it's about 50,000 per bag. You understand? Then, of course, a loaf of bread, the cheapest one you can get now is just about 1,000 naira. Who can afford it?
Okay, so
it's a terrible situation.
But, sorry, Nkoli, but Lahaji, I just wanted to get the clarity, because you mentioned something quite critical. On one hand, you have the Minister of National Planning Budget coming to say the realities on ground is the economy is shifting shape. Let me use the word shifting shape. And then on the other hand, you have the inflation at 26.7%. We saw what Guardian ran with as their lead. 90 plus Nigerians cannot afford a balanced diet. That means they don't feed right. So outside food insecurity, there is also the case of malnutrition. So I do not know if they're excommunicated from this part of the world, or maybe they have a different analogy of what Nigeria should look like. How do we begin to look at that as a deficit in our leadership? Because it seems they do not have a clue.
They are detached from reality because they live in an alternate reality. I mean, they are immune from all of these things we're talking about. They live off government. I mean, their welfare packages, their remunerations, their lifestyle is funded by the federal government. And so the minister can afford to say such things because it's not you and I. It's not, he's not living our reality. He's living off government. And so government subsidizes his life, while government has no subsidy from our lives. His own life and the lives of his colleagues are thoroughly subsidized. And they have swollen in ranks. This is the largest cabinet we've had since 1999 with 48 ministers and countless presidential aides, including a presidential aide on teleprompter and such other, irrelevant offices. In the country where the leadership has told us to tighten our belts, to make sacrifices, they are losing their own belts to feed fat on our own patrimony. And so this is what I've always captured in recent times as our leaders behaving like drunken sailors in charge of a sinking ship. When a sailor is drunk, he doesn't know that the ship is sinking. He doesn't know because he's drunk. That is how they are behaving. And it's unfortunate because Nigeria has never been this bad. Because there's even hopelessness. The kind of statement coming out of the highest leadership levels in the land is such that it is hopeless for us. Because they're not even speaking to reality. They are living in denial of the harsh realities on ground. Whether anybody likes it or not, the removal of subsidy on the 29th day of May 2023 by President Ahmed Bola Tinubu is responsible for the aggravated economic situation we are facing today. Because like Dr. rightly pointed out, all economic productive activity relies on energy, the same way human beings rely on air, oxygen to stay alive. When the cost of energy rises, it's going to trigger cost-push inflation. And so when I hear experts talking about monetary policies and monetary instruments to tame inflation, I tell them, Nigeria has never experienced demand pull inflation before. Nigeria is a very poor country whose citizens are impoverished. We don't have monies to spend anyhow that will not trigger increase in price of commodities because of excessive demand with low supply. It has not happened in this country before. And so what we are facing is cost-push inflation that can only be resolved by deliberate fiscal policies to bring down the cost of energy, and which is
the deliberate
restoration of subsidy, not just on petrol to status quo, but on diesel and on cooking gas. There's no responsible country anywhere in the world that will allow cost of energy to rise beyond affordability threshold of its citizens. So your country is a country of 30,000 minimum wage. So you must, as a government, measure the barometer of affordability threshold such that when the price of essential energy products like gas, cooking gas, industrial gas, electricity, for example, in the case of Nigeria, petrol and diesel, when they are rising to certain levels, government must, as a matter of national security priority, intervene through subsidy to maintain a reasonable cost of production so as not to create the situation we're facing today. And let me tell you, because the inflationary rate, as announced by NBS, is conservative. You and I know this. It's not reflective of the reality on the ground. So they must restore subsidy, but they are not able to do that. You know why? They are unwilling to commit class suicide at this time. They are unwilling to let go of their privileges of corruption and excessive indulging on public funds. They are not willing to do that. That's why those national members are buying SUVs
at 130.
Imported from Japan.
At
this point, 60 million per unit.
And we've not seen your ministers cutting down on their convoys. We've not seen anything that looks like the leadership in Nigeria is making the necessary sacrifice and leading by example in making sacrifices at a time that citizens are paying market prices for energy, which has created these unprecedented levels of.
So it seems we're making the sacrifice at their luxury.
That is it. Let me, in line with what he's saying, when you talk about the elite and their unwillingness to make sacrifices for the good of this country, like Moji said, they are asking us to tighten our belt while they are losing their belt. I had the privilege when I was bureau chief of the old Daily Times. I had the privilege to have covered the first and second National Assembly. In the House of Representatives, how many committees do you know the House started with? The House started with 53 committees. 53. total committees in the House of Representatives. Do you know how many there are today? There are 155. 155. Starting point 53. Today, 155.
3 times the number.
Yes, 3 times the number. What does that tell you? Every House of Rep member wants to be a chairman of a committee with the privileges that comes with it, or at least a vice chairman of a committee with the privileges that comes with it. And it goes in line with what Mojid has said, that look, the rich, they are not willing to cut down on their privileges by any means. And that is why they can afford to budget 57 billion for SUVs, each unit costing 160 million. And in bringing in these cars, look, there are times there's nothing wrong with buying SUVs. If the money, the expenditure, will create a multiplier effect within your economy, but not to import those SUVs from Japan.
Just for luxury.
Where you have...
Don't we have
local
assembly plant where
yes.
we can,
yes.
at least get our government officials
to buy cars
and then empower and get the money back into the country.
And at times we wonder, why is it that in the 70s, 80s, 90s, Nigeria was better off than it we are now. Every government officials in the 80s, especially during the Obasanjo's military era, was forced to use a Peugeot 504. It was a purely government policy. And it was implemented for a very long time. I remember even through the military era. But like Mojid has said, from 1999, we have had drunken sailors in a sinking ship.
Because that should actually be the ideal thing, really.
Yes.
So that if you want that such SUV, then you can actually invest your own money for your own private, private vehicle.
Facing this level of economic catastrophe, I would have expected that the National Assembly, out of patriotism, say, look, this is not the time, this is not the session to buy SUVs. This is the time to make this sacrifice for people to see. And what worries me most? All political parties in that National Assembly. All of them.
None is speaking out.
Including those that people voted for free. That they didn't give shit for people to vote for them. None of them have thought it wise to test this level of insensitivity to say, look, as a principle, we are rejecting this SUV. The money should be returned to the brutal record, should be used to provide succor for our people.
Majid, have you thought about the backlash this can get for the particular lawmaker that will do that?
No.
Abba Muro talking about his travails being orchestrated by someone. And these are some of the issues when you become a lone voice.
There are constituencies in this country where people voted for senators and rep members for free, for them to go and make this change, this level of leadership by example in the National Assembly. It is expected of such lawmakers, and let me be specific, Labour Party MPs. It is expected of Labour Party MPs in the list to toe the line of the party, Mr. Peter Obi, upon whose platform, whose image of prudence, his image of physical discipline, his image of frugal management of public resources as governor. It was on that image, it was on that premise, that personality, that embodiment of physical discipline that millions of Nigerians trooped out to defeat incumbents in their strongholds among the traditional political parties in Nigeria to elect rookie politicians into the parliament. The list that's expected of this category of parliamentarians is to have been heard loudly rejecting this, and let it be on record. Let me tell you the danger in this. When people make such sacrifice to elect people outside of the establishment, hoping for change, and they go there and betray such revolution, such democratic revolution, it has a way of making Nigerians become, less concerned, and they will develop this apathy towards the democratic process. And they begin to think that, look, democracy in Nigeria has no process of self-regeneration, no matter how much effort they make. And they begin to think of alternative solutions to their problems. I know societal thought is such that it comes and goes, until the person commits the act. So that is the danger. So one of the dangers to our democracy is not actually alone, it's not the establishment parties alone that are misruling us. Those who were supposed to go in there and make this change, that have being sucked into the establishment constitute even a greater danger to our democracy.
But you know this.
Than those that are there.
I mean, you expressed this emphatically in saying that they wouldn't want to let go of their luxury, and for the sake of human kindness. Let's even use that. And again, it will be also wishful thinking, knowing that these people are newcomers. Before you would think that the minority will be the alternative, but now when they get into such circles and see the levity and the leveraging of largesse that is in the National Assembly, you expect them to throw in the towel and speak for the
if they remember
for the masses.
I was referring to Elisha earlier.
Remember what Abuja residents, for example, did to unseat Senator Philip Aduda to bring in Senator Kingibe. If they remember how young men and women stood in very long queues for almost 24 hours just to cast their vote for a party that they contributed their time, their energy and resources for, to bring to power. If they remember those people, and they should make the necessary sacrifice.
And I should add, they should remember that February 25th was an understated revolution. It was a revolution. And when that revolution is vested in members of the House of Representatives or our legislature, and they are not able to see it through, like he has said, the people may seek alternative form of expressing themselves. That is essentially what it was a revolution. A revolution that things can change.
Yeah.
But if things are not changing, the revolution can take another form.
All right, gentlemen, we must thank you very much. Always insightful to listen to you with all the analysis on the stories on the papers this morning. Alhaji Abdulmajid Dahiru have joined us, and of course, our own Dr. Austin Maho. Thank you, gentlemen, and do have a great day.
Good morning.